It's Joe Johnson. Joe,
Hey, how are you
thanks
doing?
for being with us, all the way
Thank you.
from the Southwest.
All the way from the
And
Southwest.
it's my privilege for you to be here this evening because, and I know you're a modest guy, but you're a hero. And so I'm happy that you're here.
A lot of heroes out there.
Yeah, I think you're right. Well, you're that generation, right?
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
the underspoken generation. But just give you just a quick overview, and then we'll talk with Joe about some of his experiences. But Joe was we understand, the youngest POW in World War II. You joined the Army at 14.
Right.
Very bizarre thing to do.
Right.
Captured, yeah, as it turned out. Captured in the Philippines. You ended up, I'm sure there are a lot of stories there about how you survived that, because a lot of American prisoners didn't survive that time. You were torpedoed while being transferred back to Japan by an American submarine. You survived that. And then I understand you ended up on the ground somewhere near one of the atomic weapons that went off.
Yeah, the camp I was in Japan was on the outskirts of Nagasaki.
Yeah, well, there's I've been there. That's a pretty amazing
Yeah.
city. Of course, we missed a little bit. The bomb went off in a
Yeah.
slightly different spot than
Right.
it was supposed to. But and I know that, and we'll talk about this later, that you're working on a book, and it's a remarkable story. It's a story that needs to be told. I know Mike Pullen, who's an attorney here in town, is working with you, and I think that's great. But let's go back and talk about your story. So you joined the Army at 14.
Well, in those days, depression was just coming to an end, so to speak.
Mhm.
And it was not unusual for younger people to be out trying to make a living. I went to work helping my family when I was probably 10 years old. And so they had started the draft in September of 1941, the first peacetime draft in history. And a lot of people with issued numbers and were being called into service. And America was trying to build up their war factories and their services. They had let them deteriorate during the Depression.
Sure. Where were you then? What part of the country?
I was at San Anita Racetrack in Arcadia, California.
Okay, sure.
My father trained racehorses, and I was with him on the racetrack. I used to exercise horses. And I was growing and was getting too big to actually be on.
You're actually a tall guy. I noticed that when we were talking earlier.
My feet was growing, my body was growing, and so he had told me, and I wasn't going to school, I was skipping school, and causing him a lot of problems with the authorities. And he decided to ship me back to my mother back in Tennessee. And that didn't set too well with me. So I threatened him. I says, I'm going to go down and join the Army. And he says, if they'll take you, you got my blessing. And they took me.
In those days, did your dad have to sign, or you just
No.
said you were 18?
They asked me how old I was. I said I was 18. And like I say, they were looking for warm bodies.
Sure.
They had quotas. And the recruiting sergeant says, do you have a birth certificate? And I says, you can write and get it. I says, they'll send it to you. And he asked me where I was born, and I told him, and I gave him a fictitious place where I was born. I told him I was born in Memphis, Tennessee, I believe. And I wasn't born there. And I figured by the time they got an answer back, well, I'd be in. And sure enough, I was.
We know you're a Louisiana boy.
I'm from Louisiana, yeah.
Right.
Rick, yeah.
Right.
I was
So
born,
now you're off to the Army.
I'm off to the Army. And I was shipped to a lot of other servicemen who had never been trained. We were raw recruits, still in civilian clothes, shipped to Fort McDowell at Angel Island, which is right past Alcatraz. There's two large islands.
Oh, yeah, I know Angel Island. Right.
Okay, well, anyway, that was the shipping point, a staging point to ship.
Yeah, it's right in it's the north part of San Francisco Bay.
Right,
it's a beautiful
right. In
place.
fact, to get to our base, we had to stop at Alcatraz going and coming because we hauled the guards and the children going to school in San Francisco, so it was something. But I shipped out from there with about 2,000 other men in March the 31st of 1941, and we arrived in the Philippines in middle of April of 41, and we were taken out to a range outside of Manila and put through recruit training by the NCOs of the regiment that we were being.
So your recruit training was actually done in the
the
forward
Philippines.
area, not
Right.
at home.
We weren't trained. We weren't trained in the States. It was a new experiment.
Well, it must have been like a little nervous trip going to the war zone without
Well,
any training.
the thing about it was, to me, it was a great adventure. You know, when you're young, you're kind of ignorant, and then you don't
Yeah,
know.
we've all been there.
Yeah,
Right.
and just the boat ride over was, looking at the flying fishes and stuff like that was,
Sure,
it was like
Yeah.
something had never been exposed to. But once we got there and went through training, then things changed. I realized I was in a situation where maybe I'd bit off more than I could chew, so to speak.
Right.
But
So where did you actually end? So you finished your training in the Philippines.
Yeah.
Then you were posted to Corregidor, or?
no, I was posted to a post in Manila, in the old walled city. Manila was built by the Spaniards when after Magellan discovered the Philippines, and then the Spaniard government took over. The Spanish government took over, and they had built a big walled city, and it was called the Intramuros. And the walls were like a huge old fort with walls about 30 feet wide, covered with grass on top, a lot of gun emplacement, like an old-time European fort. And inside was narrow cobblestone streets, and my battalion was stationed in there. And we pulled peacetime duty out of there in Manila and around the rest of the part of the Philippines.
So when did you finish your training?
I finished my training in June of 1941, 6 weeks of training.
And when did the Japanese show up?
They showed up on December the 8th, 1941. When they bombed Pearl Harbor on the 7th, they bombed us. But because of the international date line, it was actually Monday the 8th in the Philippines, but it was Sunday the 7th in Honolulu. So it was the same time, just different dates.
Yeah, I see.
And so we stayed in Manila. MacArthur had his headquarters there, and we stayed there in Manila, deployed against parachute troops being dropped in there. And we stayed there to Christmas Eve of 1941. And then they took us by barge over to Corregidor. And we stayed there to about January the 1st of 1942. And we were bombed there and lost several men there in the bombing. And then they took us with barge again over to Bataan Peninsula and trucked us up, and we formed a main line of resistance, or front line, at the entrance to Bataan Peninsula. And then from then on, it was just gradual pullback, holding the Japanese
Well, you
off.
were tremendously outnumbered, right?
Yeah, well, at that time, we had obsolete weapons. We would fire mortars and half of them wouldn't go off. We'd throw a hand grenade, half of them wouldn't go off. We didn't have the up-to-date equipment. We had the old World War I helmets. We just weren't prepared.
Did you have Springfield rifles? Is that
No,
what you did?
we had Grand rifles. We did have the
Oh,
M1.
okay.
They call them Grand
The M1,
rifles,
yeah,
the M1
right.
rifle.
Right.
I was in a machine gun company. We had 30 caliber water-cooled machine guns and some 30 caliber air-cooled and the mortars. But the mortars were, like I say, the ammunition was old, and we didn't have enough actually canvas belts for the machine guns. You had to
Reload them?
Reload them, and we had
Wow.
so after you fired about 200 rounds, you was dead in the water. You kind of had to
Called timeout.
time out, right?
So when were you actually captured?
Well, Bataan fell on April the 9th of 1942.
It's amazing you held out that long, really.
Yeah. The first 3 Medal of Honors in World War II were given on Bataan.
Yeah, I can believe that.
And so MacArthur had already gone to Australia, and General Wainwright, who was an old horse cavalry officer, was in command. And when the surrender came on the 9th of April, it was chaos.
Okay.
And so a friend of mine decided we was going to go to Australia in an outrigger canoe. All we needed was outrigger canoe.
Yeah, right.
It so happened that finally a Navy landing, not a landing craft, but a Liberty boat, where the
Right, a launch, sure.
a launch, went putting by, loaded to the gunnels with troops trying to get out of there, and they threw us a line and pulled us over to Corregidor.
From Bataan.
From Bataan. It was about 2 or 3 miles, and it was at nighttime. We laughed about it later, say they were using us for bait. They were trolling for bait, is what they were doing. But we made it, and we got there, and they issued us uniforms, and some food, and put us out on the beaches with the Marines.
The Navy did this.
Well, no, the Army did that.
Oh, the Army did
ran Corregidor, but it was all Coast Artillery and
Oh,
stuff.
okay.
But the Marines were.
So Corregidor hadn't fallen yet.
No,
but
Corregidor was
Bataan had
still.
fallen. Okay.
So after Bataan, see, while we were on Corregidor, that's when the Bataan Death March took place. They took all the troops from
that were
Bataan
there,
and marched them
right.
up the long road
Yeah.
on the base side, and they brought their artillery down on the other side.
Yeah. Sad story.
Yeah. So then they started shelling Corregidor. And it didn't take them long before there was no vegetation left on Corregidor. And then they landed on about May the 5th in the night, and General Wainwright surrendered on noon on May the 6th. Just surrendered the island. We had no food, no water. And so that's when I was captured on May the 6th, 1942.
Okay. Where did they? It must have been. I mean, that's got to be a frightening experience.
Well, I'd been through so much, and most have been through so much that nothing frightened us anymore. We were kind of numb.
Yeah. I'll bet.
But they kept us there on Corregidor, burning bodies and stuff like that, clearing shells out of the road. There's a lot of unexploded shells that the Japs had fired, and I worked on a detail where we'd lasso the bodies and drag them up in piles and pour gasoline on them, and yeah. And that was a experience. You know, I'd seen a lot of death on Bataan and a lot of stuff, but the flies were rampant. You know, you'd come across a corpse and then the face was black with flies, and when you'd move it, they all fly all over you.
Oh, boy, yeah, it's gotta
So as a young kid, I was really getting educated real fast.
Sure.
But after,
And also not exactly in accordance with the Geneva Convention,
Right.
Which is kind of a myth.
but anyway, they put us on a couple of horse boats. You'd call them cattle boats. They'd haul horses in there, and it had straw in the holes, and they put us down the holes, and he took us over to Manila at the end of Dewey Boulevard, put us on landing barges, and took us to about the end of the surf was about maybe 3 or 4 feet deep, and made us jump off and wade to shore. And they gathered us up at the end of the boulevard, and had the Japanese horse cavalry on both sides, and they had all the Filipino population from Manila waving little paper Japanese flags on the side of the road, and they had a victory parade with us marching down all down this Dewey Boulevard
You know exactly.
with the
where
horses
that
on
is.
each side, and
Yeah.
into Bilibid Prison, which was the old prison downtown. And that's when the prison camp experiences started.
Okay, so you were in that prison first.
Yeah.
How long were you there?
Only 2 days.
2 days. Then you went north of.
It took us by train up to a place called Cabanatuan. And I was there maybe a month or so, and they put me, they sent out details, work details from there. And I went out on detail to Nichols Field, which was on the outskirts of Manila. And extending the runaways for the Japanese. And it was a real bad detail. The commandant was called the White Angel. And because he was a Japanese naval officer and he wore a white uniform, he had a bad habit of killing prisoners. So I was there maybe a little year and a half, I guess. And
How did you survive that? I mean, that must have been
well, you know, human beings learn to adapt, some more than others.
right.
Like I say, I was young and didn't know really how to survive, but I was learning quick.
Yeah.
And I learned to speak a little Japanese. I knew that would help, because a lot of times when they're telling you things you don't understand what they're telling you, you get in trouble. You know, you get hit upside the head with a club or a rifle butt or
Sure.
something. But if you understand what they're trying to say, then you can kind of take care of yourself. So I learned to speak a little Japanese, and so I left out of there more dead than alive.
Where'd you go from there?
I went back to Bilibid Prison, where they had turned that into a hospital
Okay.
run by the Navy doctors. And they got me back on my feet. My legs were all full of ulcers, and I had beriberi and scurvy and pellagra. You name it, I had it. I was just a skeleton. But this one doctor really took care of me, and he used to give me sweetened condensed milk. You know, 1 can a day. That's all. You know, I don't know where they got it, but they had it. And it wasn't a month or two, I was back on my feet. And then from there, I worked on a detail out there through the city of Manila. We'd go out on work details, you know, maybe 8 or 10 guys to a truck, and we'd go do different odd jobs around Manila. And the Filipino people were great. They just did the best they could to help. They'd sneak us food, peanuts, brown sugar, anything that we could eat before, because you couldn't get it back in the bill of bed.
Sure, right.
I can remember eating 2 kilos of brown sugar at one time.
Yeah, I bet. Yeah, sure.
And so from then, they put me in, I was there till first part of December of 1944. And they put about 1,800 of us on a ship to ship us to Japan, put us in the front 2 holds of the ship. And the top side was loaded with Japanese women and children who had been down there with their soldiers.
Dependents.
Yeah, and so dependents, and they were shipping them back to Japan. And the Americans were already ready to take back Manila. In fact, they took back Manila, I think, on January the 6th, so it was 3 weeks too late.
After you guys
after
left,
yeah.
Right.
But the planes were already strafing and bombing, what have you. And we got around the corner of Bataan and up the coast to the other side of the China Sea side, and the planes from the aircraft carrier Hornet came in and just sunk the ship right there next to the shore. And we lost about, I guess, 300 or 400 prisoners right there, drowned.
Wow, sure.
The rest of us was forced to swim or wade to shore. They gathered us up and put us on tennis courts at the old Navy base there. And we sit our knees to back, just crammed on this tennis court, no water, hot sun. And the Navy planes were still, the next day they come back again. And they'd strafe right up to the edge of the court and stop and take off, get the guns going right past us over. They'd wave their wings at us. And we thought we were being saved. We said, boy, they know we're here. They're going to land, there had to be somebody landing. We're going to be saved. But it didn't happen. Mm. They loaded us up on some trucks and took us up to another town up the coast. And we had a lot of wounded and guys that were dying real quick. And they separated us, put us on another ship. They took us another town further up and put us on another ship. And this was another old horse boat. I didn't know the Japanese had that many horses, in World War II. But it was full of horse manure and horse urine and straw and some flies, big flies, and they could bite, I'll tell you. And we was on that ship for about a couple of weeks. We got over to Formosa, and we docked at Formosa. And American bombers go over and dropped a bomb right in the front hold, killed everybody in the front hold, and blasted right through the second hold, killed quite a few people there. And we sit there for 2 or 3 days before they would even try to help anybody. The Japanese, finally they were hauling the bodies out in cargo nets.
So you survived 2 attacks,
two
American air attacks. Right?
So then they put us on another ship. We got on this ship.
At this time, are you feeling like lucky or unlucky?
Well, you lose your feeling, I tell you.
I would guess, yeah.
And so we took off for Japan, and it got cold. The further north we went, it was in January,
Sure.
December and January, and snowed. We were before where we were burning up for the sun. Now we're freezing. We had no clothes. A lot of the guys were naked. It was a mess. We got to Moji, Japan, the last week of January of 1945, and there was quite a few guys died right there in the warehouse on the dock. They were just got there, and that was it.
Sure, from exposure and everything else.
Then I was shipped to a coal mine camp up out of Hiroshima, in the Hiroshima prefecture, and I worked there for about 2 months, and they shipped me down to the one in the outskirts of Nagasaki, and from then...
You had 2 chances there.
I had 2 chances, right?
That's right.
I've often wondered about that. Here, both camps I was in was right outside where they dropped the bomb, and I was very fortunate.
Amazing.
In fact, a newspaper reporter come through camp after the war. The war ended on the 15th. The bomb was dropped on Nagasaki on the 9th. And he had ridden a train all the way down from Tokyo, all the way down, and to see what was going on with Nagasaki. And he came into camp by himself. And we just know, where did this guy come from? He worked for the Chicago Times, I'll never forget. He says, well, what was it like to see the atomic bomb drop? We said, what kind of bomb? We didn't know there was such a thing as an atomic bomb. We don't know what he's talking about. And we're scratching our head trying to think, well, when did this happen? What day was it, Because we really didn't know, because they bombed every day anyway.
Sure. Right.
There's always blowing something up.
Right. It would just been a slightly bigger noise.
Right.
Whatever, right. How far away were you from the?
We were right across the bay, probably 20 kilometers.
Oh, that's pretty close. Yeah.
It'd be like if you were in San Francisco and they dropped a bomb in, say, Oakland, something like
Yeah,
that.
that's pretty close.
But then they flew us back down to Nichols Field, of all places, where I had started out my prison camp experiences with White Angel, put me in a field hospital, and got me halfway ready and flew me home to Letterman General Hospital in San Francisco.
Yeah, and then you were discharged there?
No, I went to another hospital and stayed there to January of '46. I was still in pretty bad shape. I had a bad wound on my Achilles tendon on my right leg, and I still had vitamin deficiencies.
Yeah, at least.
Yeah.
At least, right?
But they had me fit for duty in January of '46.
So did they ever find out how old you really were?
To this day, they got my records being 3 years older. They got me born in 1923, and I was born in '26. They got me born in Memphis, Tennessee, and I was born in Ruston, Louisiana.
Wow, that's
But who cares, right?
So did you stay in the service after the war? Or?
Yes, I re-enlisted. I got smart. I re-enlisted in the Army Air Corps because I had known,
Lesson learned.
after being in prison camp and seeing all these Air Corps guys that all master
Going
sergeants.
over here, yeah, right.
And in infantry, I was still a private. You don't get much rank in infantry. I said, this time I'm going to be in the Air Force, It was called Army Air Corps.
Sure.
And while I was in it in 47, I think they transferred me to
the Air Force, right.
Become the Air Force. And I got out of there in 49 and was going to stay out. I'd put in the whole decade in the service.
Yeah, I think you paid your dues.
Yeah, I paid my dues. I went to work for a Prudential Insurance Company. Like to starve to death. And some of the guys in the office belonged to the Marine Corps Reserve. And so
I sense a really bad idea.
Yeah, a real bad idea.
Right.
And to play baseball, of all things, they had a baseball team. And I had been a good ball player when I was in the Army Air Corps out at Brooks Field. Had my name in the papers.
What position did you play?
I was pitcher, first baseman, right fielder.
Well, that was the old days, right?
The old days,
Yeah.
But anyway, I had a real good fastball and no control. So
it sounds like Ryan Duran.
yeah, he was there at the time. He was from San Antonio.
Oh, was he?
Yeah, he wore those big thick glasses.
Yeah, exactly. Right.
Yeah.
Scare him. Yeah.
Played for the
scare him.
Yankees.
Yep. Yeah. Exactly.
I remember him well. In fact, I met him a number of times. But anyway, I joined the Marine Corps Reserve, and they said, you don't have to go to meetings or anything like that. They brought the papers in the office, and I signed them, and just play ball. I hadn't been there 30 minutes, and the Korean War broke out, and they called me to active duty. So I spent 3 more years in the Marine Corps.
Oh, man.
Yeah.
So, well, at least you were on our side of the lines.
Always on our side of the lines, right?
For that war.
But I've lived a charmed life. I have no complaints.
I
no
would
complaints.
think so.
I think about the guys that I was so close to that's still over there, and sometimes it brings
didn't come home. Right?
Didn't come home,
Right.
and they gave the supreme sacrifice. Where I was fortunate enough to where I got back to see my family and my loved ones.
Yeah.
But now, what I'm doing now, I think this is a very little known part of our history. Not much written about it. It's been so long ago, most people don't know where Bataan or Corregidor are. And I thought maybe if I could write it down and it would be a part of written history,
That's a great idea.
at least the coming generation could say, well, look, we didn't know this,
Well, I'm excited about it. I'm excited about this story.
Yeah.
I think you're a great person to be
Well,
doing this.
thank you very much.
And Mike Pullen is a neat guy. And
I don't know if people know it, but Mike Pullen's uncle was my best friend. Well, that's how we got acquainted.
Yeah, I guess he.
His
didn't-
mother. It was
he
his
didn't
mother's
make it,
brother.
right?
Yeah, he didn't make it. No,
Yeah.
Mike didn't make it. God bless him. And so he found me by the internet. Mike Pullen found me by the internet, looking for people who.
There's some great advantages to the internet.
If it hadn't been for the internet, it would never happen.
Well, as your story progresses, we want to have you back.
Hey, be happy to. I hope it progresses enough where I can be back.
I hope so too. Because
I live way out in Arizona, and I came up just this weekend.
We call that the Western Shore.
Western Shore, okay.
But
and I'm getting up years.
But
I don't travel too well.
But you seem you're in great spirits. And,
As they say in the racehorse business, he's not a good traveler. He don't travel good, and I'm reached that point where I like my own bed.
Yeah, I know what
peace
you mean.
and quiet.
I know what you mean. Well, we appreciate that you came to see us.
Yeah,
So
I
maybe next
enjoyed-
time we'll come to see you.
Hey, you're
I mean,
always
that's
welcome.
what we'll
You're
do.
always welcome.
But we want to. It's an exciting project. We want to get your story told, and I think.
We'll do the best we can.
Yeah, it's great.
Yeah.
Joe, thanks. Appreciate
Hey,
your being
thank
here.
you for having me. I appreciate it.
Oh, you're welcome.
All right, bye.
And we'll be right back.